kind of share with you. I can't share with you something I don't know. I can't share with you something that I haven't experienced or that I'm not going through, except for in a theoretical way. And, theory has its place, but theory also falls very short in being able to sustain us in our everyday living. So I want to share with you something today about experiencing the true self. Experiencing the true self. Ephesians chapter 5, it says this, and let me get to the scripture again. If you'd like one of our Bibles, just hold your hand up, and again, some ushers can serve one to you. Ephesians chapter 5, this is verse 14. Therefore he says, awake, you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ. Now let me just interject here. By the word Christ, it's not talking about the historical figure Jesus of Nazareth. A lot of people want to insert the historical figure of Jesus of Nazareth in the word or phrase Christ. Christ is a consciousness. Christ is a state of being. Christ's consciousness is a state of awareness. So let's just interject it that way, because that's how Paul, a Gnostic, wrote. He says, awake you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ's consciousness will give you light. As far back as my dark days of separation, or also known as orthodoxy, as far back as my dark days of separation mentality, I even in that paradigm understood that there were two kinds of knowledge. There is one kind of knowledge is called information. The collection of data, learned or memorized, truths yet known from a theoretical level only. I mean, understand what I'm trying to express here, that we can go out and get a lot of information. We can read books, we can watch videos, we can look at documentaries, we can study great writers and study after gurus and sages and mentors and prophets and all different kinds of writings. We can listen to someone, and irrespective of your particular persuasion about him, Buddha had some incredible insights about enlightenment and freedom. You can look at Krishna. You can look at the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. You can look at the Gnostic writings of Paul. You can look at all these different things and gain this huge mass of information. You can call it education. But at the end of the day, it may or may not serve you very well, because it's all in your head and it never goes down into something called your heart, or it never registers and becomes a part of you. And we live on that level a lot. So many times as we're hungering for truth, we can substitute and be deceived into thinking that the collection of information or the acquisition of data is sufficient in and of itself. Even to the point that we can change our viewpoint, our perspective, and our belief system about something, and yet it's still a surface level of information. And then in contrast to that, we would have something called revelation, the revealing, when it becomes real to us, when it actually becomes our life, when it becomes that part of us that there's no way we can go back to where we were before, where the transformation takes place. And there is what should be the quest we have, that we have this desire and this awareness and this hunger for revelation, that which truly becomes a living part of our experience. See, until something changes us or brings about a change, whether that be an awakening or an awareness or an enlightenment or whatever it is, until it brings about a change in us, it really hasn't become a part of us. Until it's something that actually is incorporated into our daily activity, then again, it's simply something that is lying on the surface level. And that's not to make anybody feel bad, because we all start out there on that surface level. We have to lay it on the surface first, but at some point in time, it has to penetrate deep down into our own consciousness. That is what gnosis is. When we talk about the Gnostics, the word Gnostic comes from the word gnosis. And gnosis is a particular type of knowledge. It is a Greek word that simply means that kind of deep experiential knowing. I struggled with some examples of what I'm trying to communicate here about this, but I thought this way. I remember as a kid always seeing pictures of the Eiffel Tower. We've all seen pictures of the Eiffel Tower. But it's a whole different experience to stand at the base of that thing and look up and know what it feels like to experience the magnitude of that structure. All my life as a kid, I would see little pictures of the Mona Lisa, and, all the stuff about Da Vinci and the history and the mystery of that lady and what was she really smiling about, and, all the different things going on in that. And I remember when I was in the Louvre for the very first time and looked upon it, the first reaction was, all the fuss is about that. And then when I really began to look into it and began to feel it and then began to experience it. And it took me 2 or 3 trips before it became something that really had some mystical, spiritual value that I could feel the energy of coming out of it. A lot of it had to do with my own maturity and ability to recognize and discern that. But the point I'm making is it's one thing to read about it in a book, it's another thing to stand in front of it. It's one thing to see it on television, it's another thing to stand in its very presence where the energy of it is surging through your whole system. And that's the difference between information and revelation. That is the difference between a mere collection of data and something called experiential knowledge. Gnosis, deep experiential knowledge, is the full feeling and experiencing of something first and for yourself. This is an understanding that is burned into your deepest consciousness that elevates one's awareness toward an awakening, toward totally altering one's own perspective. And this level of knowing, if you don't hear anything else but this today, hear this. That this level of knowing and experiencing can be at no greater level than when it is applied to the knowing and experiencing of oneself. To really experience the true self. People hunt for God. People search for God. And how many times we've all felt like we found Him. We found Him in this ritual, or we found Him in this religion, or we found Him in this particular denomination, we found Him in this particular teaching, or this particular dogma, or this particular doctrine, or this particular mindset, only to stay there long enough to find out that it doesn't fulfill, and it really is very empty. And the funny thing about it is at the end, if we ever come to this end of the search of searching for God, it's only because we come to the realization that what we're really looking for is an awareness and an understanding and an experiencing of our true self. Because when we find and experience the true, genuine self, you find God. Because therein the true self is God. See, this level of knowing and experience, and this gnosis, this experiential knowledge, has no greater application than when we can truly know ourselves. Most people, and I was in this category for many, many years, and not that, it's not capable of slipping right back into it, but most people live and die and never experience their one true self. There's a scripture in Romans chapter 12. I'll just read it to you very quickly. Certainly you're welcome to turn there. It says this in Romans 12:2. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. What in the world does that mean? It's a powerful, powerful exhortation here by the Gnostic Paul. That here he exhorts us to come out from behind the masquerades and masks of our false identity created by, quote unquote, the world. Now, being brought up in a very traditional Orthodox religion, we would read this verse of scripture, be not conformed to this world, and we had all this long list of things we couldn't do, things we couldn't wear. I mean, have you ever had that experience? Here's the things you can't wear, places you can't go, things you can't do. And we thought that was not being conformed to the world, and yet we were just right there in that same thing. The world is simply the collective. It is the collective mindset of the brainwashing and all of the